So a quick introduction. My name is Nitin, and like most of you, I came to the US as an international student. I went through my undergraduate experience at the University of Miami on F1 status, pursued banking right after my undergraduate degree, then pursued my MBA program. I was an F1 visa again for a couple of years, but this time around, when I graduated from Berkeley, I wasn't able to successfully seek the H-1B lottery or the H-1B visa, and so I had to leave the country. Fortunately for me, because of the network or the professional network through Berkeley, I was able to find a role in Brazil. And I worked with this company also in Norway. It was a Norwegian company. Luckily, they had a US office. And so I was able to transfer to the US office on this specific L1 category. And so the reason I share my story is because there are alternative options, even if H1B doesn't work out for you for some reason. Hopefully it does. But I just wanted to share my experience so you can see there are many unique journeys, and hopefully you'll be able to find your own experience as well. So first and foremost, expectations versus reality. And I will speak to my experience as well and what my expectations were when I first came to the US. The expectation was that when I go to a top US institution or when I graduate from a US program, all these employers will reach out to me with job offers or internships. So obviously, as you might already know, this is a little bit of a misconception. The university is providing everything they can. They lend you the brand name, the career offices are there to provide you resources. They are there to provide you support. But no one can, at the end of the day, offer you a job or land you a job. The hard work has to come from the students. That's the premise of the whole situation. Despite everything, you will have to work hard. And there are, yes, as an international student, there are challenges, but those challenges were highlighted during the US visa process as well. If you remember clearly, when the consulate gave out a visa to any student, any one of us, even I was, in the same boat, they want to make sure there are ties to the home country and so forth. So there's no false promises from the beginning, but the fact that we have access to OPT and especially for STEM majors, 3 years of OPT and beyond that H-1B, that's in my opinion a bonus. So if you want to work in the US, it's good to change that frame of mind that, look, if I do the things right, there might be an option for me to continue staying or even work in a multinational organization outside the US. But getting in that frame of mind is very important, first of all, so you don't feel like you're fighting against the system. And another fact that I wanted to mention here is that a lot of jobs, at least in the US job context, job search context, are hidden. What that means is, say, for example, Interstride, or we are hiring social media intern or a marketing intern. So before we advertise any jobs on social media or any other job search platform, the easiest thing to do is reach out to our network. And that network includes employees in the team. And so if I know someone in the team, I'll say, hey, do you know anyone else in your network who might be interested in this position? So that's why networking is so important, because you are getting into that network. And usually your close connections will come from your alumni contacts. And we'll talk about it a little bit, but just wanted to, again, and these are directly from the sources themselves. So just talks a little bit about the importance of networking. And then lastly, the mistakes that are made by international students. So general mistakes, missing deadlines on OPT, CPT, just not following up. So you don't want to be one of those students who misses your OPT deadline. And just be careful, mark it on your calendar today when you're graduating. And if you've already graduated, just make sure that you know your 60 days or 90 days until you have to find a job. But making sure that you take advantage of your CPT and OPT and your different work authorizations, because you won't believe how many times we've spoken to students who missed their OPT deadlines, for example. Second piece is the underutilization of campus resources. So your career services office, your alumni office, your international student office, they're all great resources. Again, as I mentioned earlier, no one can land you a job. You'll have to do the hard work yourself. But there are so many resources, from platforms that can connect you with alumni, to platforms that can help you with job search, to other resources that might help you build your profile. So all these resources are stepping stone to the final goal of finding that job or internship. So make sure you utilize those technology, the resources that are offered, because you don't want to cram it all up towards the last 3 months of your graduation. The one big thing that we tell international students is to start as early as possible. Even if you are a freshman or sophomore in a 4-year program, or during the first year of your master's program, it's never too early, especially as an international student. Mainly because you'll require sponsorship, you'll require all these conversations with employers. Networking takes time. So make sure you're starting as early as possible, at least in that career frame of mind. And lastly here, with the general mistakes, one other thing is the importance of LinkedIn profile. So LinkedIn profile, you want to make sure is a nice or true reflection of your resume. and you put a professional picture, which also again demonstrate you as a professional. It's not a social media tool, it's a professional platform where employers are continuously looking at you, right? So even if you don't know, a potential employer might be looking at you from the talent solution platform, which is the back end offered to the HR offices. So you want to make sure your information is up to date, all your project, classwork. So try to update it as much as possible, because again, the profile is tied to the ATS system that HR officers use to source talent. So those are some general mistakes that students don't realize or take advantage of. But other than that, in the pre-application phase, the two big things that I mentioned is networking. So one, students have limited exposure, and I was guilty of that myself. When I first came to the US, I had no idea what networking meant. How could you reach out to, professionals or alumni, and what were the conversations that you were supposed to have? So that's something that you need to brush up on. The second is communication challenges. As you reach out to these alumni, as you reach out to prospective employers, make sure your written communication, use Grammarly if you feel that the communication is not up to par. Your spoken communication, or when you speak to these employers, if you feel like your English is not up to par, you might consider some language courses or reach out to your writing center and so forth. And maybe it's just taking classes. There are some courses, free courses as well available, and they're tagged on the student services on the InterStride portal. So you could look at that as well. But just making sure that, because communication is one of the top reasons that employers list for not hiring international students. On the application piece, making sure that if you do receive an interview, so the first and foremost, we'll talk about value. How do you demonstrate value to an employer? That piece is really important to rise above domestic students, to convince an employer that I'm even worth sponsoring, because if you look at it from an employer standpoint, why should I sponsor an international student? There's another $5,000 or $6,000 or $10,000 cost and time associated with it. There must be a value. There must be a reason to sponsor. And that reason should be that, okay, this student brings additional value. And that value you have to demonstrate through your resume, through your interviews, and so forth. So that's one. Second, if you do receive an interview invite, you want to make sure you're prepared. So conduct mock interviews with your career center. Make sure you're prepared so you don't lose that chance. Because you, as an international student, I can tell you honestly, you won't get too many interview invites. Those interview invites that you receive are from companies that have historic records of sponsorship or feel comfortable employing international candidate. That the subset itself is pretty small. So any interview that you receive, you want to make sure that you convert it to an offer. So preparation for interview is key, and being comfortable to talk about your experience, to talk about your background. The last piece here is following up. So courtesy and just being, politeness is part of this entire process. So whenever you meet people, you have to be thankful. You have to make sure you follow up with thank you emails. So it's anyone who's spending time with you during this process is basically giving you their time. No one owes you anything in terms of support. So generally, if people are spending time with you to give you an update on an industry, or even maybe give you an information interview, please follow up with a thank you message, because that goes a long way to show that you are very professional in your approach and in your dealings. But let's talk a little bit about the immigration journey. So I'm obviously not an immigration attorney. I'm not going to touch upon specific immigration topics, but generally you should know about all these terms. And the key takeaway again here is don't miss any deadlines. So, and especially for the OPT, because if you are graduating and you don't apply for OPT on time, you might miss the boat on even being able to register or apply for H-1B. So these are some of the terms you should know. If you're a STEM extension, you probably already know that you can get up to 36 months of OPT, which is a nice period of time to be able to seek that H-1B visa, and you can apply for the H-1B lottery 3 times. And so for many F1 students, the ideal scenario is going from F1 student to CPT, doing your OPT after you graduate, and then from OPT you get the CAP extension, which is right here, which transitions to H-1B visa. You can work up to 6 years on H-1B visa without any issues. You can even switch employers on H-1B. And then after that's complete, the employer can, even during the term of the H-1B, the employer can sponsor your green card. And in some cases, even after OPT, an employer might be able to sponsor your green card. But yeah, again, I don't want to get too much into the detail and weeds of the immigration process, but generally this is a pretty well-traveled journey by many other international students. And personally, I went through the exact same experience as well. The only difference for me was after the H-1B, I had to leave the country and I came back on L1. From L1, I went into green card. So next section here is about adding value. How can you provide value to an employer, your self-assessment, and also a little bit about the market. So this is a survey conducted on employers. This basically highlights what employers prioritize. And so you can see it's not the university rankings, it's not, your GPA. The number one thing that employers prioritize is prior work experience and internship experience. And the reason for that is simple. Like say, again, I'm just going to stick to InterStride example. If I'm hiring someone with social media or marketing skills, right, it doesn't do me any good if you're studying from tier 1 institution versus tier 2 or top ranked marketing program. What does help me is like you've done something similar before. So yes, you can have really good theoretical knowledge about something that you might have studied in classes, but there's no substitution for practical experience. So how do you demonstrate that value? It's obviously as an entry-level candidate, this is not the ideal situation. Like you don't come in with tons of experience or 5 years of experience or 3. So whatever you do in your school, say even basic project work that you might do, or summer internships, or between your undergrad and graduate experience, if there was any work experience, all that is really valuable from an industry knowledge point of view, as well as functional expertise. So now it's important to distinguish between some of these concepts. So let's just quickly look at it. Industry knowledge is the knowledge of a particular domain, right? So if I am working in aviation and suddenly I want to switch to technology sector, it's a little bit of a stretch because you know everything about Boeings and you know Airbuses and you know about different jets, but you don't know enough about the back end code and front end code and how technology is built. You might know about aviation technology, but that's very different from actual tech, as in, for example, Google and Apple and Netflix. So similar to that, functional expertise. Now, functional expertise is the knowledge of a particular topic. So if you're studying engineering in school or if you're studying finance, so now suddenly you try to, after you graduate, you're looking for jobs in a completely different arena, you're not bringing too much value to an employer. The more industry expertise that you gathered, your 2 years or your 4 years and through your internships and through your project work and functional experience, the combination of this is really valuable to employers. So again, coming back to my example here, if someone has edtech experience and they have marketing experience in the edtech sector, that's a pretty solid set of skills for someone at InterStride, for example. Similar to that, now, in addition to this, professional experience, as an entry-level candidate, if you are a master's student, you might have a few years of experience. But as an undergrad, you're not expected to have full-time experience. So whatever coursework that you might have done, any unpaid roles, any internships, those are all relevant experience because that still shows that you have some experience so it's not, an employer doesn't have to start you from scratch. And then finally, as an international student, you might sometimes see that as a liability because of sponsorship. But the truth is, as an international student and over the course of your journey, you'll realize this more and more. You bring in a lot of value to employers from a culture standpoint, diversity standpoint, languages, regional expertise. And as you progress in your career, whether it's in the US or abroad, you'll realize how much this helps in growing even within the organization or outside the organization. From a professional standpoint, your international education will always be useful. And I can assure you that whether you believe it or not right now. So again, if you have internships and if you have past experiences and if you have project work and your major, for example, you want to stay consistent in your story as you graduate and you apply for positions, because employers will see that on your resume. They're like, okay, this student has an idea of what this job is about. And so something you can do proactively is also, when you look at a job, try to see it from an employer-centric point of view. Think of yourself as the employer. Would you hire yourself for that position? So that's a critical way of assessing whether you should be applying to that job or not. Now we come to the interesting point here about sponsorship. So let's just say you were able to demonstrate value to an employer. You know exactly what you're studying. You're a good fit for XYZ companies. How do you know they'll sponsor you, and where should you even be applying? So the good news here is that this information is also available for you. So first, if you have access to InterStride, you can log into InterStride, go on Visa Insights. And I just did a search today, and these slides are just from my search. So I did a search for entry-level financial analyst role. So you can see here on the bottom of the screen, experience level entry and classification financial analyst. So you can put in pretty much any position and you'll see all the employers that have sponsored that position. You can also click on that map mode to see where these roles were sponsored. So this is pretty much applying a little bit of data in your job search process. So rather than applying to companies that will never sponsor you or don't have the know-how of what it takes to hire an international, the default job search strategy for students should be to look at these large companies which have a large historic pattern. And the reason I push you towards large companies as opposed to startups is because of the visa lottery. Now, even say for example, you get a job at Citibank and your H-1B gets denied by the US because, as I mentioned earlier, it's a lottery process. And I hope you already know that. If your lottery is denied, Citibank will relocate you to the London office, to the Toronto office, bring you back on an L1 visa, just like I came back on the US. If you get a finance job at a startup and your H-1B is denied, remember 20% chance of getting the H-1B lottery this year at least. Next year could be very different. But startup is just going to say, hey, we can't really do anything. We don't have any global offices and we don't want to, keep you remote in your home country because of the time difference. It's not ultimately the startup they might be able to relocate you to Canada. I don't know that that's a specific situation, but generally it's a safe bet to apply to large companies because even if H-1B is denied, these guys already have a backup plan in place for you in parallel with the H-1B. Who's going to sponsor you? So these are the companies that are going to sponsor you. It's clear from the historic record. We have the latest data on the platform and you can click on view, you can look for open jobs from these companies. The second piece, even further filtered down, is now, this is a pretty big list, right? This is a broad, but within these companies now, some of them are closely partnered with your career services office, and some have even recruited international alumni from your campus. And that information is also available. So you can reach out to your career services office and say, hey, can I get a list of international alumni that graduated last year and where they went to work? And now that's a pretty solid networking target for you because you can reach out to someone from your country and say, look, I'm graduating this year. I'm in the similar boat as you were 2 years ago. Would you be able to assist me with my job search process or internship process? So where are the top companies for international students? Companies that are doing well in the current economic environment. So which companies are doing well? You'll do that research, right? You'll find out the hiring, and you can find that out through general macro trends and understanding how the economy is doing and looking at what type of job openings are there. But then overlap that with historic data of how many of these companies have historically hired international students. So those are your best target companies. And to be honest, all this work has been done for you. It's on the platform. If you go to InterStride, if you go to Visa Insights, you click on this company and you click on the positions tab, you can find out all these opportunities. So it just requires a little bit of dedication on your end to find these roles. So the idea of networking, again, as I mentioned, when I first moved to the US, for me, I thought networking had something to do with like cables, and that's what a network meant, like internet. But I didn't know networking actually meant connecting with other people. So if you are in the same boat as I was, I wouldn't be, embarrassed because, again, it was something new to me. But over the course, I think, having lived in the US and worked in the US, I've really honed in on my networking skill, and it takes a little bit of time. It's like working out or running. The more you do, the better you get at it. Don't expect wonders from your first meeting, but you have to put yourself out there to get a sense of what it is. It's as simple as finding people who you want to connect with. So the networking also can't be just blind. Like, you are not trying to reach out to just anyone, right? Like, there's no point in reaching out to anyone. There needs to be an end goal of what you want from this conversation and why you are reaching out to a particular person. In your case, it might be an internship or a job. So reach out. You first need to identify which industry or companies that you want to reach out to. Second, then you need to identify who these people are. And these people are there, right? Like, these people are generally alumni from your institution that you can reach out through LinkedIn. You can reach out through any mentorship platform. And then last piece there is scheduling a short call or meeting to build that relationship. The call piece is building the relationship. And once that's established, then you can ask for, hey, I'm looking for internship. I'm looking for a job. Can you refer me internally for this position? Can you introduce me to someone? But it's not like a quick process where you can suddenly expect wonders. That's why I said you have to start early if US job search process, where you give yourself ample time to build this network. And it will pay dividend. I can guarantee you it will pay dividend, because That's the best way of going about the job search process. As you go about this recruiting, this networking process, and we'll talk obviously a little bit more, one thing to keep in mind is distinction between hiring managers and the recruiters. Recruiters or HR, they are responsible for screening candidates. They are not responsible for the final decision. So as you reach out, say you want to find a job at Google, HR, their goal is to support the hiring manager. This hiring manager could be responsible for the Pixel phone, or they could be responsible for Google Maps, or they could be responsible for Google Cloud. So they are the ones who want a member in their team. And this member can be you, but HR is just going to screen you to make sure that, at least you're worth. So when these people or the hiring managers, they are at some on-campus events, or they are at a recruiting event, or these are the ones you want to reach out to and network. HR can never make that final decision for you. So just something to keep in mind as you go about this process. And these people are so flooded with different requests that they won't respond to your LinkedIn message. It's very hard to get attention of an HR person because so many people are contacting them for 100 different things. But hiring managers, if they have an opening in their team and you reach out to them at the right time, they'll interview very quickly. So what is the informational interview process like? So again, find your contacts. Think of your alumni as these contacts, your school alumni, and find companies that are in your target list, and find these contacts at those target companies. Schedule an informational interview, share a short text on what you can say during these emails or LinkedIn messages. And then once you speak to them, then you want to apply to those jobs and ask them for internal referrals. So one of the secrets here is that, if you apply to a job and someone from that company refers you internally, they get a bonus if you get hired. So there's all the incentives for the employee of that company to refer you internally if they like you. So that's one, asking for internal referrals. And then second is, say you speak to someone in the marketing team because that's the alumni you could connect with, but you are looking for a finance job. You can ask that person after your call, it's like, hey, this was a great call. I learned so much about the company. Can you introduce me to someone in your finance office? Because ultimately that's my area of interest. So just a high level overview here. So which sources you can utilize for your networks. So again, just keeping it simple, LinkedIn has all the resources that you need. But in addition to that, you can also utilize any platform that your career services office, your alumni office offers. We recently introduced a network tool to connect international students to international alumni. Depending on how long your institution has had the platform, you'll be able to see alumni on InterStride as well. And these would be specifically international alumni. And then obviously, if you have personal and professional network from your past employment, if you have family in the US, they are a go as well. So I'll skip this slide, but just a high level summary of the informational interview process is to keep it light. Listen more than you thought. The goal is to keep it very conversational. Never ask for a job because they know why you're there. So it's very clear to a particular professional that you might have reached out to why you're reaching out to them. Either it's internship or full-time, but you can hint. But basically, it needs to be light. And this will get better after you practice a few rounds of informational interview. You'll automatically get better at it. But also, this is where you can seek some support from your career services office on how can I start, how can I do this? And you can do a couple of practice rounds with your career advisors. But this is a simple message, for example, what I would send to if I wanted to speak to someone. I would say, hey, I'm a student at XYZ University. I saw that you graduated in 2010. Love to speak to you about your role at whatever company the person might be working at. Do you have some availability for a quick phone chat in the next couple of weeks? If you reach out to 10 alumni, I can guarantee you at least 5 or 6 will respond back to you because everyone looks forward to helping students. A couple of other things here as well. So on in-person networking. So this is just more of a courtesy and etiquette related conversation, but it's something that is important. So one of the things that I have been, again, guilty of in my past life as a student is going after the popular employers. So in this example, the gray ones are the employers or the hiring managers, and the blue are the students. And so think of this as a networking event. So usually what will happen is there'll always be students who are just chit-chatting among themselves. And there are always some employers like the top, favorite employers, which will be crowded by hundreds of students. Again, finding a job as an international student can be difficult. You don't want to miss opportunities at these events. So any employer that you feel is open, is looking forward to a conversation, reach out to them and have conversation. Don't waste this time socializing with your friends. There's plenty of time to do that. And whenever you speak to to any of the employers, if anyone joins you, it's not a competition. The employer doesn't see you guys as a competition. They might hire you both. They might hire pretty much, like, some employers are capable of hiring an entire class. So it's never a competition with another candidate. Just give room to your classmate, to your peers, and make sure that everyone's part of that conversation. And so again, these things are, although it might not seem obvious to the employer, they keep an eye on these things to see how you behave in public, how professional you are in your approach, because this could eventually be a year from now, a business meeting where the employer is taking you to meet clients. And so they want to see how you behave in a setting like that. So again, in this case or this example, the services you are selling is your services to employers, right? So ultimately, look at this as a sales funnel. Target 10 to 15 companies. 20 might be a little bit too many. So find out, like, based on your major, do some research based on the H-1B sponsorship. Who are these top 5, 10, 15 target employers that are capable of hiring you, capable of sponsoring you? Stick to those companies. Don't need to be too open-ended and blind with your job search process. Reach out. Passively, you can continue the passive job search of submitting resumes. That I completely dismiss, because it's almost like winning a lottery if you get invited to an interview through those mechanisms. But this is an active approach, a proactive approach, where you are applying data, you're applying some frameworks, you're applying a process to your job search. And so reach out to 10 to 15 companies, shortlist 20, 30 alumni at those companies, and start that process. And your goal should be to have at least, a few calls per week. So then you can keep track of this funnel and have a spreadsheet, keep this information handy. And so over time, you'll see that these employers will reach out to you for interviews themselves. And you can, once you build those relationships, you can reach out and say, hey, XYZ, I'm graduating in 3 months. I'm still looking for this internship or an OPT experience. Do you know of any open position? So that's really where the network comes into play, because now when we are close to graduation, you're desperate for an opportunity, you can always tap into this network again. So start building this network as soon as you can, because you don't want to be graduated and suddenly pushing yourself to do this, and that can cause a little bit of anxiety, in my opinion. But now we talk about the backup options. And the reason this is important is, as I mentioned, despite doing everything right, despite working hard and making sure you've done everything, the challenge with this is the H-1B is a lottery process. So the H-1B is government mandated process. I mean, there's 85,000 visas available every year. And as I mentioned a couple of times now, last year, there were 480,000 applications for that. So the cap is set at 85,000. And then the submissions were 480,000. So you can do the math in terms of the acceptance. And so when that happens, you have no choice but to leave the country. Luckily, for large employers, they are able to relocate you to a foreign office. For a small employer, they might not be left with too many options. So one option is, and that's something that I suggest proactively to look at, if your goal is to work in the US, if you want to get some US experience and you are industry agnostic, meaning you don't really care about whether it's the healthcare sector or the education sector, there is a thing called cap exempt employer, which is very important. So cap exempt employers are higher ed institutions and nonprofits. So they still need to sponsor your H-1B visa, but you don't have to go through the lottery process. So the advantage is that, say the school that you're studying at right now, they decide to hire you in their finance office or in their IT office or whatever office it might be. They have a full-time position open and you find that job. They can hire you on the H-1B cap exempt role. So then they don't have to go through the lottery process. So only 2 or 3 types of employers, the main ones being higher ed institutions and nonprofits. So that's something to keep in mind. On InterStride platform, there's a filter where you can look for jobs from cap exempt employers. That's one. L1, I already mentioned. So the L1 visa allows you to re-enter the US if you were stationed abroad with a multinational company. National interest waiver is relevant for graduates and PhDs. So depending on, and the visa is called the national interest waiver. So obviously you need to be of national interest to the US. And with PhDs, STEM PhDs is very easy now because there's a process, 22 different PhDs in certain areas can apply for this very easily. Even as a master's candidate, you might be eligible, but this is something worth speaking to an immigration lawyer about. Again, I'm not the expert. And then for startup entrepreneurs, there's another visa called O1. But all these are covered in different webinars on InterStride. So you can, if this is an interest area for you, just keep an eye on the different webinars, sign up for that newsletter, and you'll learn about these different options as well. I already spoke about the future employer to relocate you to the international office. So again, with Chase or Citigroup or any large multinational organization, you don't need to worry about the mobility. They'll take care of this. And then finally, just depending on where your passport allows you to work, you can always look at a third country and opportunities. Continue to look for opportunities and network back home, because obviously you want to keep them, in your radar as well if things don't work according to plan. So that was my last slide. Just summarizing everything here. So just feel free to take a screenshot. Obviously, this webinar is being recorded. But with work authorization, start early, know your options, lack of professional network, functional and industry expertise, and target if you have very little expertise or experience, look at unpaid internships and projects. If you don't have professional network, leverage your alumni connection. Connect with hiring managers as opposed to HR. Sponsorship challenges, look at historic data to identify employers who've done it in the past. Look at your alumni data, international alumni data specifically, to see which companies hired directly from your school. Look at cap exempt employers as well, because also they are, you don't have to go through the lottery process. And lastly, have a backup plan in place. Despite doing everything right, there might be challenges. So have alternative options if the default plan doesn't work out for you. Again, create a roadmap, stay flexible. Flexibility is key. You saw my example, lived in the US, I lived in Brazil, lived in Norway, came back to the US. So it was a fun experience at the same time. So, I'm sure your journey will be unique as well in its own way. Continue to network. So network's never going to hurt you. It'll help you back home. It'll help you in a third country, and then think global. Eventually, whatever you're doing, you're studying at a US institution, the value of that education is global. And I can guarantee you 3 years down the road, once you are in a professional setting, you'll realize how glad you are to do what you've done. Thank you for joining as well. So hopefully this was helpful. If you have any questions, please feel free to write to us. Again, my email is nitin@interstride.com. You can also reach out to contact@interstride.com for anything related to Interstride.